The further devastation from coronavirus is starting to set in now, with by far the biggest daily total of deaths for any one country. That country is the United States. One of the authoritative websites is reporting the daily death toll there in the US, so this is just for the last 24 hours, is around 1,900 dead. And there's still an hour to go, by the way, that our website comes to those tallies. So that's a huge jump on the previous daily highest total. And the prognosis there over the next few weeks is horrifying in the US. So 1,900 dead just in a day there. So that is what other countries are desperate to avoid. Australia has been successful so far in limiting the spread of the disease. But like other countries, there's been a huge economic cost to that, and the plan to keep the Australian economy afloat is expected to be passed through Parliament today. Okay, so as with other days, there are many developments with this coronavirus story, so let's go through some of those developments now. The government's plan to pay a flat rate wage subsidy of $1,500 a fortnight will be considered by a slimmed down version of federal Parliament, which after today is not scheduled to sit again for 4 months. Australians who returned from overseas have completed 14 days of mandatory isolation in hotels and are now allowed to make their onward journey home. New South Wales authorities are urging people to stay home over the Easter weekend. So as I mentioned, across the US, the death toll has gone through 12,000 now, with around 380,000 confirmed infections. Some of the deadliest hotspots include New York, Detroit and New Orleans. New York State experienced a record deadly day with 731 deaths, taking the toll to more than 5,500. The state has 139,000 infections, about 3,000 more than Italy. Authorities in Paris have banned exercising outside during the day. More than 10,000 people have now died in France since the outbreak began. Another 30,000 people are currently in hospital, 7,000 in intensive care. And after 76 days of lockdown, Wuhan in China is starting to lift its restrictions, allowing people to leave for the first time since January the 22nd. So far, 2,570 deaths have been officially linked to COVID-19 in the city, although many suspect there were more victims who died in the early weeks without being tested. Okay, so let's have a look now at some of those developments in more detail. Here in Australia, senior ministers insist the government will not be making any changes to its JobKeeper wage subsidy bill today. A smaller than usual number of MPs and senators is in Canberra for a special one-day sitting to debate this $130 billion package. Political reporter Noor Hayder joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. Noor, g'day. So this is, a huge package, as I mentioned. Is it expected to actually pass through Parliament today?
Yes, it is, Joe. That's the short answer. This emergency wage subsidy scheme is expected to pass the federal parliament today. As you mentioned, Parliament won't look as it normally does. This is a pared back parliament. There'll be fewer MPs and senators around to vote on this piece of legislation. Some of them were granted special exemptions to cross between states and territories to be here in Canberra. Some of them even flew in on RAAF jets to get here. But as you mentioned, the priority today is this $130 billion wage subsidy scheme to keep Australians in jobs. Under this scheme, the government expects 6 million Australians to fall within this scheme. That's just under half Australia's working population. Now, anyone eligible for this scheme will receive $1,500 a fortnight over the next 6 months. Now, we know Labor and the unions have had some concerns about how this scheme will work, but the government insists it will not be making any changes to this legislation. We heard from the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, who was on RN this morning, and he says that the bill will remain as it is.
We won't be accepting any amendments today, and the scheme that we've put forward is very fair. It will provide support to 6 million working Australians. Our welfare system and our support systems here are residency based, and for those visitors who are not able to support themselves, either through work, through savings or through accessing their superannuation, we strongly encourage them to go home.
But Noor, Labor and the union still hold concerns about some casual workers, in fact a lot of casual workers, it's estimated about 1 million by some people, missing out on this support.
Well, that's right, Joe. Some 1.1 million casual workers won't be eligible to receive payments under the way the scheme is currently set up. So Labor says casual workers who have been with an employer for less than 12 months will simply miss out. So the way this system works is full-time workers, part-time workers and sole traders, they'll be eligible if they can show, or if they're part of a business that can demonstrate that their revenue has dropped by more than 30%. But for casual workers, they'll have to have been with the same employer for more than 12 months to be eligible. Labor says that's not fair, and it will be pushing for amendments today. It says it will not be blocking this legislation when it goes before the floor of the lower house, but Anthony Albanese, the leader of the opposition, says Labor will still be trying to make these changes in order to capture more casual workers as well as temporary visa holders.
People will be left behind by the package as it currently stands. We won't stand in the way of that package. We said that from day one, like we didn't stand in the way of the first package, even though we didn't support the superannuation arrangements, for example. But our job is to argue for improvements.
Now, Anthony Albanese also says that if Labor is not successful in moving these amendments, Labor will continue to push or pressure the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg to make changes after this legislation passes.
So, Neil, we'll be following this through the Parliament today pretty carefully, historic legislation. What's your, I know this is always difficult, but talk us through the timing of this. When does debate start, and what's your best bet on when it's likely to wrap up today?
Well, Joe, it's expected that this will Parliament will sit quite late today. We know Parliament will begin at around 10 a.m. this morning. We're expecting some speeches to be made in the lower house, but the IR Minister, the Industrial Relations Minister, Christian Porter, throughout this week has been very firm that the government wants this legislation passed today. Parliament is only sitting for one day. The government was successful in having Parliament pushed back until August, so there is no other scheduled sitting day until August. We know the budget has been pushed back until October. So realistically, given Labor still wants to push for amendments to be made, this may carry through right through into the evening, Joe.
Yeah. Okay, Noor Hader reporting there from Canberra. Another person has died from coronavirus in Victoria. 12 Victorians have now died from COVID-19. There were also 21 new cases, bringing the state's total cases to more than 1,200. And there are 45 people in hospital, including 12 in intensive care in the state. And health authorities in New South Wales have confirmed 48 new coronavirus infections, taking that state's total to around 2,700. 3 children have been taken to hospital in Sydney with suspected coronavirus symptoms. Antoinette Collins joins us now from Sydney. Antoinette, g'day. So what can you tell us about these children taken to hospital?
Well, Joe, it's just been confirmed by the Chief Medical Officer that an adult and a child from that same family group have now tested positive to COVID-19. Now, you can see those images that we saw from 10 o'clock last night. The family, a group of 7 that have been quarantined at the Hilton Hotel. 3 of them were taken to the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital after showing symptoms of coronavirus, and they were transferred to the hospital for testing. We understand that the family group will now be transferred to another city hotel where people have been staying if they have shown symptoms or have tested positive for coronavirus. And here's the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Kerry Chan, speaking earlier this morning.
It's a family group, and one of the adults and one of the children in the family have been confirmed positive, developed symptoms. And the usual course is that they're assessed clinically and placed in the accommodation at either our hospital or a hospital hotel. And that's so that we can provide the care and treatment required, and that we can also provide the general supports, that additional supports that are needed for that family.
And so, Joe, as you mentioned at that press conference, we did hear that New South Wales has got 48 new cases of coronavirus. That's actually the lowest number of new cases since the 19th of March. So clearly the Premier is pleased that the restrictions are having an impact on the numbers of new cases that are being confirmed. But she said that the restrictions will be assessed on a month-by-month basis. So whether or not any of those restrictions will be relaxed in coming months will continue to be assessed on the advice of health authorities.
Nat, there was a point at which authorities in Australia declared that everyone who was coming back into Australia had to go into quarantine in a hotel for a period. What stage is everyone at with that?
Well, what we're seeing here today at the Swiss Hotel is the 288 passengers that were on board the Norwegian Jewel cruise ship. Now, that cruise ship was refused entry to a number of ports. It eventually allowed the Australian passengers to disembark in Hawaii. A Qantas flight was chartered and brought those people back to Sydney. They have been in this hotel now for 14 days. That 14 days is now up. They're amongst several thousand returned Australians that have come back and been placed into quarantine. These people here came in before those restrictions were enacted. So we're actually expecting to see another 3,000 returned travellers freed from hotel quarantine over the weekend, and that's from when those new restrictions came in. But clearly this morning, the Australian residents, some from interstate and some from New South Wales, they've undergone final health checks before being allowed to leave, but they were very relieved to be leaving today.
The hotel was really good, no complaints whatsoever. I mean, I've just walked around here and the homeless people I've seen, and I just think to myself, we've got so many people complaining about the hotels, the food. They need to walk around here and realise how lucky they are.
So yes, most of the people were pretty pleased with the kind of treatment they've been having. This is a five-star hotel, one of the luxury ones. Of course, return travellers are staying in hotels across the city. Some have been complaining about the standard of food that they've been receiving, but the people we've spoken here today say that they were very well looked after, but are relieved to be heading home finally.
Okay, Antoinette Collins reporting there from Sydney.